How you play your piano pieces often matters more than what you play. If you play intermediate music like a beginner, you're going to sound like a beginner. Not that there's anything wrong with being a beginner, but it's very important to develop a confident and mature sound when you practice and play the piano. So in this video, I'm going to give you a few tips that will help you achieve this, even if you are a beginner. The very first tip, and I would say quite an impactful one, is to shorten your staccato notes on fast pieces. And for this video, I'm going to be using examples that come from my classical piano program, just in case you're interested. This first piece is called Wild Rider, and you can find this in level 3 of my program. And this is pretty much right on the edge of the late beginner to early intermediate phase. And it sounds like this, and I'm actually going to play it like I commonly see it, which is where the staccatos aren't particularly short. Now I'm going to play it with very short staccatos, and hopefully you'll notice a difference. Okay, and the way that I do this is by assuming kind of a rounded finger posture, and I'm going to actually bring the fingertip in even more. Well, first of all, my relaxed state is going to be slightly rounded so that I have a place to close the finger from. And from this point, when I actually go to play, I'm going to close the finger a little bit more, and it's going to strengthen this shape right here. And I'm going to have some force going here. I'm not necessarily going to pull, but it's almost going to feel like I'm plucking the note. And I will also engage the wrist and sort of drop the wrist into the finger, slightly closing, and that creates a very short staccato, a finger staccato, basically. That's what I'm essentially describing here. And to develop this technique, I like to suggest that students play their fast pieces very slow and keep their staccatos very short, not proportionally short, but just very short, so that there's a lot of contrast. And that would sound like this. And I can go even slower. And so on. And this allows the staccato note to be a lot lighter, and everything is just a lot cleaner sounding. And then the sforzandos stick out a lot more. And so that immediately takes this piece up quite a bit in terms of how it presents. And that's basically how we do this. It's very important that you actually relax the wrist on every note. So when you play this very slowly, the wrist will actually move a lot more, while you work to develop this relationship of strengthening the tip of the finger and drawing it in very slightly, and then the wrist kind of coming down and then coming back up very slightly. The faster you go, the smaller the motion will be. But this one change, short staccato notes, very short staccato notes that feel plucked on fast pieces, is going to instantly brighten up any piece, and it's going to make it sound a lot more mature. And it's also going to give the illusion, it's going to make listeners feel like the piece is actually going faster than it is. If you compare to this, that second one, even though it's not really any faster, it presents a lot better. It sounds more impressive. There's more going on because the articulation is brighter and more vibrant. So that's a big tip for you. The next tip I have for you, tip number 2, is to play with relaxed wrists and look for places to release your tension. And for this, I'm going to be referring to a piece called Arabesque by Bergmuller, and you can find this in level 4 of my program, so more early intermediate to intermediate. And this has a lot of like shifting and repeated chords and whatnot. And so before I get into this, I should mention that a lot of students, especially beginners, have trouble releasing the muscles that keep the wrist straight. So if you release these muscles and you're holding your wrist, you release these muscles, your wrist will just droop down, right? The muscles in the arm. And we don't want to play like with a totally floppy wrist. Like there are certain points where you need to tighten up so that you have enough strength and support everywhere, but it can't be constant. And that's what I see, especially adult beginners, especially older adult beginners. I see this a lot. They just have like a claw shape and everything's super locked straight from here to the shoulder. There's no wiggle room at all, and there's no mechanism to be expressive, and there's no mechanism to be fast. And so, and also you're asking for a potential injury on top of all of that, on top of all of the negatives of that. So we need to actually learn to release our wrists and everything else really, but our wrist primarily here, because this is going to allow us to get around the piano, and we want to look for opportunities to do this. So on this particular piece, we start out with repeated chords, and actually I should probably show you what it looks like if I'm not relaxing my wrist. So I'm going to try to see if I can sort of fake it. By the way, I know that sounds like a caricature. Teachers are notorious for having these obnoxious caricatures of their students that are like way worse than the students actually are. However, in this particular case, if you're this tight, it's going to be difficult to play this piece fast at all and also even, because you need the looseness and the ability for all of these like micro motions to fill in the gaps in order to make it fluid. And so that's one of the reasons why I picked this particular piece, because it really sticks out. It really sticks out. Now, a normal teacher would say, hey, just go practice this with a metronome. That'll sort it out. But what a student's going to often find is that they're going to have to pull the metronome back really slow in order to make it even, and then they're going to wonder why they can't get it to go faster. And it's because this is not loose. So on the left hand, you have these repeated staccato chords, which are really supposed to be light, right? So if your staccato is short enough, it will be perceived very lightly. So that's an objective that we want, aside from this. But also, we disengage the wrist on pretty much every chord. And whenever you have rapid chord playing or just chord playing in general, you are typically going to use the wrist, and you're going to come down on the chord, and then you're going to come up so that you can reset for the next chord. That's typically how this works. So there's motion back here. So that's the first example of relaxing the wrist, right? If I can't disengage these muscles, then I'm going to have to just go up and down from the shoulder and from the arm, right? And we don't really want that. And then on the right hand, you have these little pentascale kind of figures, which are really difficult to play if you don't move the wrist at least laterally to support. You know, the support from the wrist and the arm is really coming from the right side of the arm. And so you want to kind of line that up a little bit, not completely, but just, you know, allow it to travel in the direction of the playing. Allow this part, for my right hand, it's going to be the right side of my wrist and my arm. Allow that to kind of travel with the playing, and that gives it support. And then on top of that, you can kind of drop the wrist on the front end of these notes and then stay down and then rise, or you can move in the direction like a circle or a half circle. And you're going to use that motion to reset for the next figure. Obviously, when we go faster, we're going to have to minimize all this, but it doesn't completely go away. Okay? And also on the preparatory motion, like before you start, that's a great place to bring in this disengaged motion right before you start. You just lift, drop, lift, drop. It's a great way to start. Right? Preparatory motion. So preparatory motion, chords, shifts, those are great places to practice disengaging. If you can disengage anywhere, that's an excellent start, and you will learn, if you can do it in those places, of the three things I just mentioned, you will learn how to, just instinctively, by encountering a lot of pieces, how to disengage it more, even while you're playing. And thus, you can develop a very fluid technique, and we really want that. One other place to play with very relaxed wrists and also use the wrist in this way is when you're like soloing out a melody, which we can talk about another time. I actually have a lot to say about that, so I'm going to talk about it another time. But it's very much involved, right? This motion is involved even in soloing out a melody and making it really cut through. So that's one other example. All right, tip number 3 is to taper the ends of your phrases. And by taper, I mean slow down and decrease the volume slightly. And I'm going to use a piece called Elegy by Gurlitt. This is from his Opus 172 collection. It's a very nice collection of pieces. I don't normally love Gurlitt's writing. It's a little vanilla for me, but the Opus 172 collection is actually really nice. There's a lot of really nice pieces in there, and I've tried to incorporate a number of these into my program. This one comes from the level 6 portion of my program, so solidly intermediate. And if I play this without tapering the ends of the phrases, without getting softer and slowing down at all, You know, I don't use any rubato or any kind of expression or whatever, and it's just like very metronomic, it would sound like this. Okay. Now, it's actually a very nice piece, and the harmonies and the general construction of it sort of speaks for itself, in my opinion. However, if we could just do that one thing of, especially on the timing front, just slow down a little bit at the ends of the phrases and allow for some repose, some rest, it really takes this up, and then you can enhance that further by also getting a little quieter. And to make this obvious, I'm going to count so that you can see and really hear and judge that. So we have in 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Now, I should probably go over what a phrase is. A phrase is a complete musical thought. Phrases aren't always marked with the long slur markings, right? Many times they are, especially when you have an edition that is very pedagogically focused or has an editor that's really trying to get you to lock onto that idea. But for most music, you're going to have to discover the phrase yourself, and figuring out what is a phrase, that's kind of subjective. In other words, pianists are going to disagree maybe how many bars a phrase is, okay? In this piece, I'm pretty much taking 4-bar phrases. Okay, that's what I hear the first phrase is. And so basically we have a peak in the middle of that phrase where I'm kind of moving the action and the energy to that point. And then at the end of the phrase, I'm slowing down a little bit. If I don't count, it sounds like this. I'll do that last phrase one more time with the counting, just so you can kind of see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In other words, it sort of feels like a ball, like rolling down a hill and then back up a hill. All the phrases feel like that. That's a very natural, human, non-AI way to render a phrase, right? And we want to keep our human way of playing and experiencing things, especially in this day and age. So this is one of the most like baseline, easy ways to bring that into the music, is to figure out what the phrase is, slow down slightly at the end. If you slow down slightly at the end, that means you're going to have to start to accelerate a little bit at the beginning of the next one, which is sort of the other part of this. But if you just concentrate on the slowing down part, I think you're going to get a lot of the value. Very big bang for the buck tip is to do this one thing. And if you do this, especially on your slower pieces, it's going to really elevate it. And if you combine the slowing down slightly with also getting softer, depending on the piece, some pieces we don't want to do that, but this one for sure, then the effects sort of multiply one another, and it makes the effect even stronger. It also makes it to where you don't need to slow down nearly as much if you also get softer because of the way that we perceive that, just so you know. So low effort tip with a big payoff, in my opinion. All right, the next tip is to separate the melody from the accompaniment. Now, this can be difficult, especially early on. I don't really start to bug my students too much about this until like we get to that level 3, level 4. So late beginner, I start to talk about it a little bit. And some students can do it earlier than that, but you know, there's obviously some choreography issues, some between the hands, right? So this piece, the Orphan, comes, or it's in my program in level 4, I'm pretty sure, near the end of level 4. And by this point, a student is pretty familiar with the idea. And the basic idea here, especially on a slower piece like this, and you can use this wrist motion, like I mentioned this earlier, you're going to use a different technique for the right hand compared to the left hand. For the right hand, I'm going to allow a lot of motion and weight from the arm, and I can kind of increase that sense of momentum by engaging the wrist and moving the wrist. And also making sure the fingers are strong at the end, and I'm going to create a very penetrating sound with my melody. We want that. The score here is marked piano. However, it's more realistic to play the right hand of this like mezzo forte or something, well above mezzo piano at least, but probably closer to mezzo forte, especially on the peak of the phrase. And then on the left hand, you're trying to get as close to pianissimo as possible. And the average of the two are sort of going to reflect the indicated dynamic value. This is how I like to think of it. This is how I like to explain it to my students. So when you see a piano marking, it doesn't necessarily mean play the right hand soft, play the left hand soft, because you're not going to get any separation if you do that. In fact, you're going to get something like this. I can't really hear what's going on. The left hand has more notes, and it's in a very resonant part of the piano. So we have to compensate for that by minimizing the presence of this left hand. And it's difficult to do, especially when you pedal, because when you use the pedal, you have all of the resonance of the piano, and that actually makes everything a lot more likely to be too loud or louder. So that's an added element to this, but it's part of being a pianist is to develop your touch and figure out how to play softly with the pedal. And it comes down to a couple of things. It comes down to lack of motion, especially vertical motion with the wrist. I'm going to need some lateral motion because I need to be able to follow this arpeggio. I have my pedal down right now. And then also I'm using the closing of the finger as I play the note just a little bit, but it's doing it slowly. Okay, so I want you to think about your dynamics, your loud and soft, as a function of key velocity, how fast the key goes down. When we press the key very fast, we also tend to use a lot of force. When we press it very slowly, we also tend to use very light force. So a lot of people think, oh, well, press hard, that equals loud. Press soft, or press with not a lot of force, that equals soft, right? But I can press like really, really hard, but really, really slow. Like really hard, if I did this to your arm, it would hurt your arm because I'm bearing down on it. But I'm not using enough velocity for the hammer to actually ever even make it to the string to show you that this is a velocity-based mechanism. So when we play loud, we also we play forcefully but very quickly. We have a very high key velocity. Okay, we want higher key velocity on the right hand, more vertical motion, more momentum. On the left hand, we don't want that. We want you to actually be really in the keys. You can even break the surface tension of the keys, right? The tension holding the key all the way to the top, you can kind of break that a little bit and get this kind of separation. So you see there is an actual technique difference between the hands. My right hand is using the vertical motion with the momentum and everything, high key velocity. Left hand's using low key velocity, not a lot of vertical motion. I'm trying to basically start from nothing. I actually have students do this sometimes. Start from nothing and then try to phase in from nothing, And by the way, I don't want the right hand forte. I don't want that. I need it blunted a little bit so that it still sounds very melancholic and reflective. But that kind of motion, that's what you want to use. I don't remember where I heard this, but I love this metaphor or this sort of like illustration or illusion. What am I trying to say? This mental picture of something that can help you get this kind of technique right. And that's to feel your right hand as if it had a rock or something very heavy tied to it, and feel your left hand as if it had a feather or like a balloon, actually, like kind of holding it up, right? So totally different sensations. This hand's like bearing down, and this hand's like very kind of floaty, and that's how you can develop this. And this is one of the big things. Like, this is a really big thing. This is something that applies to the most elementary music at level 1, where you just start to play. But if you can play with good melody separation, it's going to immediately make it sound better. And obviously, you absolutely need this to play something like a Chopin Nocturne and do it any justice, or really any other kind of piece, especially romantic pieces, especially pieces that use the pedal. So that's something to very much keep in mind here, okay? The last thing I'd like to talk to you about, the last tip number 5, is to not be afraid of silence, and also don't be afraid of long notes. This is something that it's kind of subtle, but it really shows a student's musical maturity. Do you have the patience to actually hang out on longer notes? Do you have the patience to have any silence in your piece whatsoever? Do you have the patience to have any kind of rest or repose, or let the energy die out a little bit before going on to the next idea? And can you do this when people are watching you? So this is something that it's subtle, but it matters a lot, and it really adds polish to your piece. I don't think it's as important as some of the other tips. And also I had a little bit of trouble picking a good example for this, but I think this is probably a decent example. So this is the Ave Maria from the Bergmuller 25 pieces, and I have this in level 5 of my program. And it sounds like this with, let me see if I can play it for you with no rubato or anything like that, and no sense of hanging out on the long notes. And I'm just gonna play a little bit. I'll play a little bit longer just so you can get the idea. It's pretty boring, even though the harmonies are nice. Okay, that's probably enough. So if we incorporate some of the other tips, like good melody separation, even though this is a 4-part piece, we can talk about that another time, and also a little bit of the rubato, the tapering, and then we also will linger on the long notes at the end of the phrases a little extra. So this is really kind of playing into that tapering a little bit, but it's intentional. Where you have any kind of rest in your music, my personal style is to like milk it a little bit and stay even longer and see how much I can get away with. And especially if you have a silent moment, which those are rare in pieces, but there is one, or there's an opportunity for one right here after the fermata. So let me show you that again, where I will sort of try to hold things out a little bit. Let me do that again. I'll go on, silence. In my opinion, that amount of silence, that amount of lingering is probably the most I can get away with, but also it's perfectly acceptable. It's my style. I do like to do that, especially on romantic pieces, especially when there is a moment where I can kind of pause. I like that. I like that dramatic effect. Just so you know, a little background, I am also an organist, and I play at I've played at some big churches and whatnot with nice organs and everything. And I think that instinct comes from my instinct to kind of linger and play up the silence a little bit, play up the long notes, comes from being in these really big spaces and listening to the instrument die out a little bit before going on. And so it's a very natural way to play when you're in a big acoustic space. Even if you're doing it on piano, if you're playing on piano and you're in a big acoustic space, you can really feel the power of the silence there. And so I challenge you to try to feel the power of the silence here, even in your practice room where it's all dry and you don't have that acoustic. You feel it just through timing and intuition. And lastly, before I move off of this topic, I'm going to count for you where you can hear kind of how I'm thinking. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and so on. I can hold fermata, usually 50% more, or possibly 2 times more, depending on where I am. So I might go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rest, and that's the silence, right? And of course I missed my entrance, but that's the idea here. And I feel like this is very effective. So I'm using counting to draw my attention to that, to make it to where I can have complete control of it, complete granular control of everything. I use the counting. And speaking of that, that's sort of a bonus tip. That's not one of my 5 tips, but it's prevalent in a lot of how I prepare music. I use counting a lot. I count out loud a lot. I count out loud to draw my attention to certain things. A lot of people say that counting out loud, I guess they sort of equate it to like being rigid, like with a metronome. Like if you're going to count out loud, you have to count perfectly, But actually, you can count expressively. You can use counting to pull out a lot of these other tips. And so, if I can give you a bonus tip, I would suggest that you do a lot of counting out loud and use your counting out loud to make musical decisions and go faster or slower. And like for example, with rubato, where you adjust the timing of something for the purpose of expression. Well, if you are counting, you are much more likely to be able to do it tastefully compared to if you're not counting. And I don't mean you need to be counting all the time, but when you make those decisions, it's very important to stay aware of the pulse. You don't lose the pulse completely. Some people, when they use rubato, they just forget the pulse completely. So if you use counting, you can feel the pulses widen out or squish together. If the music's accelerating, you're squishing them together. If you're having that sense of repose, you're widening out the beat. And so counting can draw your attention to that, and it can make it to where, especially once you become experienced doing this and you do it on a lot of pieces, it makes it to where you're very likely to stay within the bounds of what would be considered tasteful. And where people can always tap their foot to what you're doing, even if you start to mess with the rhythm, their foot would tap along with that, which is very helpful to have that kind of command of your piece and still have the listener follow along and be immersed in it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these tips. If you are interested, you should check out my classical piano program, and I'm going to link to that below. Leave a comment or a question if you have any concerns or questions or thoughts about any of these pieces or these things that I talked about, and I hope to see you again soon.